Though it's a day earlier from our usual Mailbag Friday, let's still get to our questions next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned in to another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. And you can listen to us on wherever you download your podcast. That could be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. For you first-time listeners wondering what to expect from this channel, we bring you episodes Monday through Friday, 30-minute episodes in length. And as we've said all week long, we almost always have our mailbag episode on Friday, but it will be today on this very fine Thursday in Kansas City, because tomorrow we are going to do a special crossover episode with Locked On Padres, give you a quick breakdown on that series, and maybe more importantly, based on where these two teams are at, how did we get to this point on the season with both of these records, I would say by the fan base's standards, being underachieving? Okay, let's jump right into question number one, and we're going to start it off on YouTube, then make our way over to Twitter. This one is from Reese. Jack, thank you for the content. I know it can't be easy with this bad of a season. Is the Royals farm system underrated because guys like Chourio, Shields, and Hammond just aren't close enough to the big leagues? Feels like they could all be top 30 prospects in a year. I would say that's part of it, but most organizations have guys like Kendry Chourio, David Shields, and Josh Hammond. The Royals' inability to always hit on their first-round selections has put them where they're at. It is not to say that Kendry Chourio and David Shields can't be big-time players, and I'll throw Josh Hammond in there as well, but they have just not had enough depth in the farm system to warrant being top 5 or top 10, right? So I would say that it is maybe part of it where these guys are not to the age yet or in the top 100 rankings where that could catapult the Royals from 26th to 15th, but they're going to have about 5 to 6 more guys that have high upside for them to get into that top 15, top 10 territory. This next one is coming from do you think the Royals should clean house in the offseason, move on from some scouts? Most of these guys have been here from the Dayton Moore era. They're going to need to make some changes for sure. If this season ends up as a 100-loss campaign, which all signs are pointing in that direction, you can't go into next year without any changes. Because I'm going off of what you said last year, right? 82-80 was seen as a disappointment. The players were let down. The coaching staff was disappointed. You can't then go lose 100 games and say, well, that was just more of an anomaly, because you basically said 82-80 was the outlier here, that you believed you were a playoff team, and if that standard is going to be held, you cannot return next year with the exact same coaching staff, the exact same front office, the exact same scouting department. Those are all things that I would say you need to have maybe a longer look at in the offseason. So I would tell you right now, I'd be pretty surprised if everything stays in place going into next year. And if you do that, then you're going to need to have a lot more activity in the offseason looking at free agents and trades that might be on the table this coming winter. Okay, let's move on to the next one coming from Jet. When it comes to the trade deadline or offseason, would you consider trading Blake Mitchell when he is playing a little better, when you have Ramon Ramirez say at the same level playing better? The Royals are not in a position this deadline to be trading away prospects. They need to be selling or soft selling. You want to go and trade Blake Mitchell in the offseason, it will need to be for a pretty good haul, I would say, but not something that's out of this world, right? Blake Mitchell's still striking out 35% of the time in high A, and until that improves, he's not really going to be able to improve on that prospect status. So I would say that you can revisit it in the offseason, but this deadline, I would not be for the Royals trading any of the prospects that they have in their farm system. Now, you can probably tell that we just had a little bit of a jump there from our previous question to now because my dog was squeaking the toy, which I'm sure you could hear in the first couple questions there. So now I've had to shut the door because I'm not going to be taking the toy from the dog. This one is coming from, looks like Armageddon Sports. Do you think it would be wise for us Royals fans to root for Detroit, Boston, and Minnesota to do well up until the trade deadline? That could potentially remove Skubal, Ryan, and Gray from the trade market, therefore making Walker and Lugo more attractive. That's a great way of looking at it. That's something I hadn't even really thought of up until this point. I would say the Tigers are going to keep Tarek Skubal at this point unless they bottom out between now and August 3rd. If they do trade him, they are going to wait until the very last day. I would say that if we see any move involving a Tarek Skubal, Joe Ryan, guys on the Boston Red Sox, they are going to wait until the final day. The Royals don't really have that luxury with Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo because I don't know if the numbers are going to be that much better between now and August 3rd. But if you get Wacha rolling and those teams start to play well or continue to play well, then yeah, that is absolutely something where a team could say, all right, well, if the Tigers aren't trading Skubal and the Twins aren't trading Joe Ryan, let's see if the Royals are more interested in trading Michael Wacha if we give them what their asking price is, or we meet that asking price. That's a great way of looking at it, and though it may sting to cheer for the Tigers and Red Sox and Twins, it's not like it's hurting the Royals at all, unless they're going head-to-head, of course, but when you're 21 games under 500, it's not like you're battling for a playoff spot at this point in time. This one's coming from Tucker. In my opinion, Q has been given too many chances already. Do you see him making it to next year? And if so, how long is the leash for him? Same for JJ. My stance on this has remained mostly the same. Next year, everybody's going to be on the hot seat. That's if you finish this year close to or at 100 losses, you can't go in the next year saying, well, everybody's job is secure no matter what happens. That's what this year really felt like to me. You know, you go 86 and 76, 82 and 80 by Royals standards. That's not catastrophic, but you lose 100 games. Now that's 2 out of the 4 years that Q has been here. You've lost 100 games. First one, you can't really fault it too much. The roster was really bad. This roster is not 100 loss bad. And injuries aside, it has been a downright awful year. But going into next year, yeah, the pressure cooker is going to be turned up a little bit here. I mean, the stove is going to be much hotter, and I would expect them to assemble a team in the offseason that has a much higher floor than this one. You continue to lose, you get off to a bad start, then yeah, I could see a situation like we saw in Boston, like we saw in Philadelphia, where you go, okay, another year where you're not meeting expectations, somebody has to fall on the sword. It would be a little bit more aggressive to fire J.J. Picollo midseason. That, of course, would have to come from John Sherman. But yeah, I believe that Mac Quatraro and this coaching staff know that they cannot get off to a slow start next year, assuming that they are going to have a much better roster than they did in 2026. This one is from Jared and Julie Smith. Hot take, do you think the Royals trade for Luke Weaver of the Mets, has a contract with 1 more year on it, and can boost a bullpen retool going into the offseason? Well, it sucks to know that the Royals did have Luke Weaver at some point, and it was in that same year, I believe, with Brent Rooker, so 2022, and they moved on from him. They did not get a lot. They traded, I'm already blanking now on who it was, Emmanuel Rivera, to the Diamondbacks, and Rivera actually ended up playing pretty well for the Diamondbacks while he was there, and helped them get to the World Series that year before they lost to Texas. But the Royals got Luke Weaver in return and didn't get anything out of him. And then he found himself again after he left Kansas City. I'm not sure they're going to be going out there and acquiring relievers from other teams that are selling. I guess I wouldn't rule it out. It'd be a good way to start this thing because Luke Weaver would immediately become their best reliever in the bullpen. But I don't see the Royals being in that position where they're going to be buying a reliever still on a contract that's somewhat expensive. I would imagine anybody they're bringing in, young, controllable players that they can evaluate in the second half. Let's get to one more before our first break. This one's from Tim. I see a glimmer of hope for the Royals offense with Bobby, Kaggs, Vinny, Carter, Jensen, and the young core. My bigger question is pitching. Which minor league arms do you think realistically make an impact on the 2027 staff? And one more question, has the time come for the Royals to move on from Salvador Perez? With the Salvi question, or the portion of that question, I would say that they're not going to move on from him. Salvador Perez needs to move on from the Royals. And what I mean by that is he needs to retire. That's how this relationship will come to an end. The Royals are not going to force him out and get rid of him, DFA him, release him, or anything like that. And nor should they. I mean, the numbers are not good this year. Salvador Perez is an icon. He's a Royals Hall of Famer. He's one of the most recognizable Royals of all time. You treat him with the utmost respect, and I believe they're going to do that. They're going to respect that wish I'm sure Salvador Perez has of just finishing his career in Kansas City. And it would be better for the team if he just came out at the end of the year and said that was going to be it. I have my doubts about it, but if he does break George Brett's record and he can go out in that way, does he really want to go through another grueling season where we already know the Royals will need to have Carter Jensen as their everyday catcher moving forward? I believe that Salvi will not want to play any longer if he's not a starter anymore. And I'm not sure he wants to go play anywhere else in his career. So that might be the best path moving forward, is him just retiring. As for the other question, I'm not sure there's anybody close enough to make a big impact in 2027. Maybe Ben Kudrna, if he's healthy. I would say that Justin Lampkin, once he comes off the injured list, when we spoke to, we never had the chance to play the interview because of some technical difficulties. But when we talked the other day with the voice of the Northwest Arkansas Naturals, that was something we did touch on with Justin Lampkin, that on Memorial Day, he was ready to start in that game, and then he just was a late scratch there. So it's good to know at least that he is with the team. He's tried to make a comeback, but something is constantly bothering him. We just don't really know at that point. So Sean Mernon, of course, the voice of the Northwest Arkansas Naturals, that is something that they don't have a ton of information on. But he is somebody I would expect to have a chance to compete for a spot in 2027, more so middle to end of the year. But there's nobody going into spring training that I believe can make a huge impact for the 2027 team. Okay, let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, we'll get to more questions on YouTube next on Locked On Royals. On the biggest stage in the world, FanDuel is changing the game because sometimes your players get subbed off and your bet goes with them. Not anymore. With FanDuel's Super Sub, if your player is subbed out, your bet stays in. That's right, if your player leaves the match, your bet continues on with the substitute. So you're still in it without up until the final whistle. In matches like these, anything can happen, and now your bet can go the distance. Let there be goals this summer on FanDuel. Like I said, let there be goals this summer on FanDuel, and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON to get started now. On to segment number 2 of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can listen to us on wherever you download your podcast. Continuing to roll on with our YouTube questions, the next one is coming from Pike Temple. I understand the fan base's preference for Burris at 6, but I'm not sure Eric Booth Jr. or other college players really had that much better of a ceiling/floor than Zion Rose. Yes, he was lower on the consensus board, but everyone outside the big three had question marks. What is the realistic outcome for Rose in Kansas City, and do you think he can stick in center? The part about sticking in center is pretty important to me, because the Royals have just not been able to land that cornerstone piece in center field. Somebody that you run out there every single day, high-value guy, can hit at the top of the order, middle of the order. Think Lorenzo Cain in your mind. And the ability to play all three outfield positions, even though Cain played center field and then a little bit of right field when you had Gerard Dyson to come into the game as a defensive replacement in center. But to me, I'd take the bat of Zion Rose. If he's a good bat, am I going to be up in arms about him being a left fielder? No. But the Royals really need to have that center fielder of the future. It's evaded them ever since Lorenzo Cain left for Milwaukee. And to get Zion Rose a top 10 pick in that spot, I'd be all for it. So knowing the Royals very much value defense and defensive flexibility, they're going to try him in center field. He's going to need to know how to play all three outfield spots, but his defense has to get much better in center. He's got the speed, and I'm sure working with guys like Rusty Kuntz at the lower level, that's only going to better him once he makes his big league debut. And I believe he is going to make his big league debut in the next 2 to 3 seasons. The ceiling for a guy like this, I mean, clearly the Royals believe he can be a multiple-time All-Star. A lot of that comes down to development, though. He's got the makeup. I mean, he's got a 6'1 frame, 210, 220. That's a solid center fielder that you're looking at. And somebody that's got a little bit of pop in the bat. He can steal a ton of bases. He can go gap to gap. He barrels the ball. Those are all positive signs there. And I've said this before, Zion Rose was 30th on MLB.com and I believe 21st on ESPN. Not because he was, I believe, that much lower than everybody else. It's because he only played in 36 games. When you miss a chunk of your final year in college, you're not going to be good enough to be top 10. Now, Drew Burress and Eric Booth Jr. could be much better players than him. Like I said, a lot of this comes down to development. But if Zion Rose played in 65 games over the 36 that he did, I'm sure he would have been top 15. I'm not sure he would have been top 10, but he was a really good college bat for all 3 years. This only matters, though, if the Royals development team can work with him. And they would have had to do the same thing with Eric Booth Jr., and they would have had to do the same thing with Drew Burress. Only time will tell to see what all 3 of these guys become. I would still say that the highest ceiling of all 3 of those guys would be Eric Booth Jr. The highest floor is probably Drew Burress, I would say, so that's not a good sign for Royals fans, but there's a big question mark on Zion Rose because he was more of a reach and because he was ranked outside the top 15, top 20 among all of the MLB draft prospects. Though, let's just see how this all plays out here. The Royals can't miss on him, I do know that. They like this guy a lot, then show us why you like him so much and that he is somebody that can progress quickly through the minor league level. Moving on to this old detailing dude's question. On this list, who do you anticipate gets traded? Lynch, Strom, Lugo, Waka, Thomas. In my opinion, Thomas has played well enough to sign him again. Yeah, if you do, of course, that will need to be discussed in the offseason. I'm not sure they need to worry about any 1-year extension to give him right now. To me, if he's available in the offseason and you want to run a platoon in center field, he clearly lived up to that contract that they gave him. It was a cheap 1-year deal, but these numbers Lane Thomas has produced, that's better than I thought he was capable of doing. And he continues to hit lefties well. But I do believe he gets traded. Strom doesn't really have that much trade value. I'm not sure that anybody's going to want him with the velocity as down as it is. Lugo and Waka, I doubt it. I'm going to say Thomas, Schreiber, and Lang will be the 3 likeliest to be moved. Daniel Lynch, they're going to need to listen to for sure, but in trying to reconstruct this bullpen, if they were to say, we want Steven Cruz and Daniel Lynch and Lucas Ursig to be back, and then we're going to replace everybody else, I can understand that way of thinking. This one's coming from Matt, and it'll be our final question on YouTube and final question of this segment. I was shocked. Actually, no, this is, does the Rose pick have anything to do with the fact that the Royals will be able to pay him less than those other higher rated guys? It absolutely is a part of it. And I know we had one of our listeners ask, can someone explain to me, like I'm 5, what underslot and overslot means? Well, if you go underslot like the Royals did, you're trying to save more signing bonus money to guys that you take in round 2, round 3, round 4. Whereas if you go all in on the highest ranked prospect, think Jacob Lombard, who dropped from the number 5th ranked prospect to 15th in the draft and going to the Marlins, it's clear that he is going to be a lot of money. And though it's not a bad way of thinking, if you believe in the player and he's really good, then the signing bonus shouldn't matter that much to you. The Royals went underslot with Frank Mozzicato in that draft, which was 2021, because Kumar Rocker was asking for north of $10 million. And then he ended up not getting drafted by anybody, I believe it was. He went and pitched, wasn't it, internationally, and then came back and was drafted in the first round, pretty high up by the Texas Rangers. So those are all things that organizations work with. They have to work around. The Royals going underslot with Rose allows them to sign a guy like Jack Slidham, who they took in the 2nd round, who's going to be a little bit pricier for a 2nd round pick. And Batista as well, who was the 4th rounder. Taylor Rabe, see, I thought at 30 they were going to go overslot. They really didn't. Taylor Rabe's not somebody that I envision being an overslot guy. We'll see what all the numbers look like probably by the end of the weekend. But I'm hoping the Royals can sign at minimum 15 out of 20 of these guys. If you get to 17 or 18, I would say that's a pretty successful draft and being able to lock up a lot of those guys. But Zion Rose being underslot, there are positives to that. because that means you can sign other guys that might have gone to college if you took them in the 10th, 11th, or 12th round. I mean, you have Camden Johnson, too, out of Oklahoma, the reigning World Series champions. He was in the 9th round, and he was a big part of that Oklahoma team. In the current era of NIL, college is enticing. College is somewhere where you can get money and be an everyday player and not have to worry about minor league ball for another year and try to boost your trade value. Now going under slot, the Royals could be more enticing to a guy like Johnson and give him an extra million or two or a couple $100,000 more, and that could maybe get him to sign instead of going back to college. Again, we need to see how this all plays out. I probably will just hold my tongue until we see just who all is signed in this Royals draft class. But you got a bunch to choose from. Let's see if the Royals can land about 17 to 18 of these guys. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll wrap up this Mailbag Thursday edition with our questions over on Twitter. This back-to-school season, spend less on your kids with Amazon. We all know how crazy the back-to-school shopping experience can be. It starts with a few items on the list, then suddenly you're shopping for supplies, clothes, lunch gear, tech, and about 10 other things you didn't see coming. It adds up very fast. When you buy clothes for back to school, then your kid has a growth spurt 2 weeks later, and you're right back where you started. Sometimes it genuinely feels like they're growing faster than your budget can keep up. When your kid's definition of need for back to school shopping is a lot different than your definition of need, you just know the list can get longer and longer every time you look at it. Explaining the need versus want conundrum this time of the year, has just become an annual part of the process. So remember, with Amazon's low back-to-school prices, just spend less on your kids, because every dollar you don't spend on them is a dollar you haven't spent on them. Shop back to school at Amazon and spend less on your kids. On to our final segment of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. We answered all the questions on YouTube. If I missed anybody, just respond below to this video or tomorrow's special crossover episode with Locked On Padres, and I'll try to have it answered at some point before next Monday. But the first question on Twitter is coming from Jeff. What is your take on teams doing deferred money, and should it be allowed or not? Should there be some kind of restriction? Sorry if the question needs a longer discussion time. I wouldn't say it needs a longer discussion time. I'm against it, but I'm sure we're all thinking of the Shohei Ohtani contract. Shohei Ohtani having all that money deferred because of the endorsements he was getting in the United States and in Japan, it's a no-brainer for him. He's making more money off the field than he ever would be on the field. And then late in his career, when he's thinking about time after baseball, he's going to get all that money paid to him by the Dodgers. Now, that could really hurt the Dodgers 10 to 15 years from now, but that's a problem for another time. We don't even know what the game's going to look like at that point. It's been going on for much longer than just Shohei Ohtani, but he was the biggest free agent that we had ever seen up until that point. So him doing deferred money, signing with the Dodgers, it made everybody angry because then the Dodgers could still spend a bunch of money, and that they have. They have assembled a dynastic team. But I am against it moving forward. I'm hoping that's something that the MLBPA and the MLB Owners Association can figure out here. Because deferred money for a guy like that, it is unique because there's few players that have that much of a global tie. I mean, Shohei Ohtani is arguably the biggest phenomenon in baseball because of how Japan views him and how the United States views him. You're not having a bunch of players that can do that. But to prevent these mega teams, then yeah, deferred money probably needs to be something that both sides come to an understanding on. And I'm hoping that deferred money is not going to be a thing after we get through all this stuff in the offseason. This one's from Matt. What are your expectations for Vinny in the second half? Over, under 750 OPS? I'm going to say under. If he can be above 720, we'll take it for what it is. But to me, that bat speed, it's what I'm eyeballing here. It's not so much what the exit velocity looks like, the barrel percentage, the walk rate, the expected batting average. I'm going to be eyeballing what his bat speed is. His bat speed is much slower than it was last year, and we are seeing across baseball, the harder you swing, the better chances you have of barreling it up and hitting it far, hitting it in the gap, bunch of home runs, bunch of power. Jack Caglione swings the bat harder than anybody else on the Royals. It's a big reason, I believe, that violent swing, but a controlled swing, why he's had better numbers. Vinny's swing, a little bit slower. The contact's not there. He's hitting a bunch of ground balls to second base. He's not being as selective at the plate. So I'm going to go with under on that. Let's put it at 715. That 715 to 725 would be my guess for his OPS in the second half. Craig's question, how is our farm system so bad and who's responsible? Yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier on. I would say that it's missing on so many first-rounders because those guys should always be top 100 guys, whether they are 99 or they are the number one prospect in baseball. The inability to hit on first-rounders in the top 10, yeah, that just can't be happening. But they've also had guys that have just flamed out. Second-rounders, third-rounders, fourth-rounders, they haven't been developed properly. To me, it's more so about the development team than it is about the scouts. I believe the Royals are scouting some really good players, but that only gets you so far. You're scouting those guys, bringing them into the organization, then it's the organization's job to develop more talent out of them, then turn them into a big league caliber player. They haven't done that, and that's been a huge black eye on the organization, and it's been that way, really, I would say, since the end of the 2000s. Like 2008, 2009, 2010, they had a top farm system in baseball. They weren't winning a lot of games, but you were hopeful for the future. And getting guys like Hosmer and Moustakas, trading for Kane and Escobar and Jefferson, Odorizzi, trading Will Myers, who was the top prospect, and Odorizzi to get James Shields and Wade Davis, that gives you flexibility to bring back talent at the big league level and build a winning team, which the Royals were able to do from 2013 to 2015. But when you don't have a good farm system, think about how hard it is to trade away pieces in the offseason and trade away pieces at the deadline. This one's from Optimistic Husker Fan. Even though this season is an overall failure, what are your biggest bright spots and things to look forward to? Jack Caglione, Carter Jensen would be at the top of that list. I would say Bobby Witt Jr., just being one of the top players in baseball. It's something we should never take for granted, whether Bobby spends his entire career here or he doesn't. We are witnessing one of the greatest players in baseball, and they're playing for the Royals. Outside of that, I would say there has not been many bright moments. It's been centered around those three players. And Michael Wacha, of course, just continuing to be a steady hand in that rotation. That would be a bright spot. Daniel Lynch's emergence has been another one to look at there. But really, when you're 21 games under 500 and your expectation was to win the division, you're going to have far and few between when looking for bright spots in 2026. But here's to hoping we get more bright spots in the second half. Spoons' question, if there is a lockout next year, or at least half the year, or longer, do you see that affecting the younger guys like Shields and Churio and the timeline they get to the MLB? Absolutely. Think about the COVID year. It was a different thing, but to not have minor league ball, I mean, these guys can work out, of course, but you're hindering their ability. And that's why I know some people really believe the lockout's going to happen for an entire year. At this point, I would say at most they're going to miss a couple of weeks there. There's just too much on the line for the owners, and there's too much on the line for the players, of course. And the players need to understand it's not just about the big league team here. This is about the minor leagues and guys that are not making the money that you are. I am very pro-player, absolutely. But the most important thing here is that you come to a common ground, you meet in the middle here some way, somehow, and get baseball to be played from the start in 2027. Because it's minor league players, it's people that work at the stadium, that's their way of income. It needs to be more of let's take a bird's eye view here in what really matters. And what really matters is baseball being played fairly in 2027. But you're exactly right. You don't have baseball for half the season. That is going to push back the timeline on all of those top prospects that we see in the Royals organization. This one's coming from Derry. Over under 3.5 players traded by the Royals this deadline. I'll go over. I believe they are going to move the majority of the guys on expiring contracts, whether it's for cash or a couple of prospects or big league ready talent. I do see it being over. Colton's question, do you think the Royals give India a low money 1-year contract for him literally just to be a bench piece? I'm going to say no. Coming off of another year with an injury, poor numbers, I'd rather them just stick with Michael Massey and Nick Lofton at second base going into 2027. Brett's question, Ideal starting lineup for opening day 2027. I'm going to say Ian Happ for the big free agent acquisition they would get. Let's put him in left field. Let's go, oh boy, center field. That's another area they're going to need to figure out. For now, because I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, let's say it's Isbell and Thomas again, Caglione and right. Let's go with Massey and Lofton at second, Bobby at short, Michael at third, Vinny at first, Carter behind the plate. And then DH-wise, that's probably another area they're going to need to look to upgrade, but that would be more of a trade route. It wouldn't shock me, too, with Taylor Ward being a free agent, if they finally go out there and try to make it happen. You've had interest for 3 to 4 years. That seems like another affordable contract there. So if the Royals went out there and added an Ian Happ and a Taylor Ward, how much better would you feel about that lineup? Or maybe you go and you have Isaac Collins in left field, and then Ian Happ or Taylor Ward becomes your DH. That's another thing that they could look into as well. RB Carr asks, over under 3 trades from the 40-man roster before the deadline. Yep, I'll just say over on that again. I'll put it 4 to 5. Eli's question, what does Brian Bridges AA and AAA look like? I can't imagine it looks like retreats and journeyman like it does, or retreads and journeyman like it does today. I would say that for a organization that is putting all of the development on Brian Bridges, we're still going to need to have another year or two of draft picks to kind of see that through, because some of the guys that are still here, they were prospects drafted almost in the Dayton Moore era. So Brian Bridges is going to need a couple more years to really have his hooks into the organization of guys that he drafted and he's been trying to develop. Spoons asks, how worried are you that JJ has become less transactional over time? And his quotes awfully similar to Dayton. I honestly like JJ, but his quotes this year are Dayton-esque, and this deadline has me worried. I wouldn't be that worried about the deadline. The Royals don't have an abundance of pieces to move, but I do see them being a little bit more transactional. It is different than the Dayton Moore era, at least slightly in my opinion. There were years that even in 100-loss years, Dayton Moore didn't want to move anybody. I do see the Royals moving some pieces, and on the quotes part of it, yeah, some can rub you the wrong way, but when you're losing games, there's no perfect thing that you can say. I understand people want him to go out there and go, this is unacceptable. We're going to be firing guys left and right. This is an embarrassment. These guys should be ashamed. I would say few GMs behave that way. So even though you may want that, I believe that anything he was going to say would kind of fall on deaf ears. It wouldn't be anything that moves you, and you'd be viewing it the way that you are right now, as a lot of people I'm sure are, just frustration and disappointment because this team has been so bad in 2026. Looks like we have 4 more here. We'll go rapid fire. Eli is going to make a statement, if I agree with it. People are way too upset with Rose not being a top 4 prospect in our system, when it's a good thing a high first rounder is not immediately our top prospect like it has been previously with Gamble, Hammond, Kaggs, and Mitchell. It's one way to look at it for sure. I would have liked to see him higher than 7th, probably in the top 5. But again, we haven't even seen the guy taking at bat in low A just yet. I'm sure we'll be getting that here in the coming weeks. Bryce's question, it was reported earlier that we won't move Waka and or Lugo unless the return is massive. Is that just a leverage play, or is that legitimate? Maybe a little bit of both, probably trying to leverage their names a little bit, but it is going to take a pretty big haul for them to want to move those guys. I don't agree with that strategy. If you get a good enough offer, then you really need to consider it, even though those guys have done tremendous things for the organization. Tommy's question, heard someone compare Zion Rose's situation to J.J. Weatherholt with him being hurt at the start of the year and that lowering his draft stock. What are your thoughts on that? That is another good point there. And I said that if he played in 65 games this year, he's much higher than he is on that list. And Weatherholt was the unanimous 1-1 going into the baseball season 2 years ago, but the injury at West Virginia held him back a little bit. He fell to the Cardinals at 8, and they're pretty thrilled that he did. I would love for Zion Rose to turn into this draft class J.J. Weatherholt, but a lot falls on the Royals' shoulders in developing him properly. The Green Crown asks, you might have read this question on YouTube. When it comes to Blake Mitchell, we would get more value for him if we trade him at the trade deadline or the offseason because he is playing a little better when we have Ramon Ramirez playing better at the same level. Yeah, so I believe that was your question earlier. I'll just refer back to that. The only way they move him is in the offseason for a big-time bat, but it would probably have to be a couple more prospects put in there. But I don't see them moving him at the trade deadline. They're probably just thrilled that he's playing a little bit better going into the second half of the season. And lastly, Danny's question, the clear answer this offseason at the coaching staff and front office level has to be firing developmental staff and scouting staff, right? For this team to be so bad for so long and have so many high draft picks, something has to be wrong, right? Maybe it is, and we have criticized the developmental staff, and like I said, I'm not sure that if you lose 100 games, you can just waltz into next year with everybody keeping their job. Something does have to change. That's why you brought in Brian Bridges to identify the talent, but you got to make sure you're developing these guys properly. I don't know where you go, where you'd start, who you'd fire, but if you do fire someone, you better have somebody immediately to replace them and hit the ground running, because you cannot be a couple steps behind when trying to develop this draft class that you just had in 2026. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every day. For your second, find the all-night Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale, and find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, it'll be a special crossover episode with Locked On Padres, but until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.